right, friends, Greg Koukl here on Stand to Reason, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to spend at least the first half hour of this hour with my friend and colleague, John Stonestreet. You might recognize the name from Breakpoint, which he's the daily voice of. He's also the president of the Colson Center. Written a book with Greg Koukl right here, formerly with Stand to Reason. The book is called A Practical Guide to Culture. He also wrote Restoring All Things. But I've known John for over a quarter of a century when I first started mixing it up with the crowd over at Summit Ministries. And I want to say, like, long time no see, right? Like 2 days ago, John.
2 days ago, that's right.
Yeah.
It was great.
So John is a featured speaker for this year's series of reality. We were in Atlanta last week, and I had the distinct displeasure of having to follow him on Friday night doing the one of the main sessions. But John came up first, and I had to, follow John. He's such a great communicator. First, thank you so much for doing that for us, John. You're on board for 6 realities. We just did one, and that's a huge chunk out of your really, really busy schedule. So I just want to thank you for lending your talents to our efforts with reality.
Oh, listen, man, it's an honor, and it's so incredibly effective. I mean, the Reality Conference is unique. There's nothing like it. And you guys are really hitting where people need, especially young people need it. Love the conversation about the story of reality and worldview, getting people to think about everything, total truth, not in bits and pieces. Now we're hearkening back to the Francis Schaeffers and the Nancy Piercy's of the world. Just super important, and the Reality Conference does that.
Yeah, and you're such a great addition there. But I think I mentioned, a quarter of a century for you and me. I think back to those early days when I was just starting to break into being someone helping out with what you guys were doing at Summit, and you were just the main player there, and it was great to get you then, and then to see what God has done through you and the Colson Center and Breakpoint. And anyway, it's fabulous. There's a reason that I have you on board, not just to reminisce about old times together, but there is a brand new documentary that is just out. I don't know if it released this week. Is that when it came out?
September 5th.
September 5th. So we're just shortly into it. I actually watched the whole thing last night. It's called, with my wife, it's called Truth Rising. Did I get it right? Yeah, Truth.
That's right. Yep.
Truth Rising. It's Colson Center and Focus on the Family and you and Oz Guinness and then a whole bunch of other people that are talking about Western civilization, and that we are arguably, at least, on a brink of a huge shift, possibly. And that shift may not be in a good direction. And I guess a lot of people are feeling this, John, especially people who are alert to worldview issues, and they know the consequence of ideas. You said it the other night, and I've heard others cite you on this one, that ideas have consequences, and false ideas have victims. And this is a big part of what the concern that Truth Rising as a documentary is addressing. So why don't you just launch out a little bit to give us some background on this documentary and how it's helping us kind of see the place that I almost said Western civilization is right now, and that's true, but it's where the world is, and the world is where it is, for good or for ill, because of Western civilization, and it has been a beacon in many ways to the future, and now that seems to be changing, and we're just not even a weekend recovering emotionally from the Charlie Kirk assassination last week, and I think a lot of people are aware of all of these things in light of that incredible event. Yeah. And so I just laying a foundation there to launch into this piece here, Truth Rising. Tell us a little bit about the documentary and why it's so important right now.
Yeah. Well, listen, the film is a journey from civilization to calling. In other words, what is happening on a global level, and what does that mean for you in your life? And that's quite an ambitious promise for the film, but that's really what we're trying to do. And by we, I mean Colson Center, Focus on the Family, and also we were able to do this with our good friend Oz Guinness. And of course, I think Oz is about as close as we get to a Gandalf of our generation,
That's a good
right?
way of putting it, right.
Well, he is.
Sans the
and
beard.
That's right, without the beard and without the pipe. But listen, Oz has coined this phrase civilizational moment, and we don't think about our civilization the way we usually think about civilizations, which is about things in the past, because we don't usually think about civilizations, first of all, unless we're in a museum or we're reading a history book and we're talking about things that were once dominant, once great, and then are no more. And how did that happen? We just maybe realize that it happened, but not how it happened. And we don't usually think about that when it comes to Western. Listen, there's never been a more sizable, influential, consequential civilization than the West. It is more dominant than any others. But civilizations have rules. And if you break those rules, then civilizations cannot be sustained. We now live in a world, and I think we can see it with the Kirk situation and the response to it, where it's not like we're agreeing on where we're all trying to go and disagreeing on how to get there. We don't even agree on where we're trying to get to. We have different definitions of good, different definitions of true, different definitions of honor, different definitions of freedom, different definitions of human. I mean, we could just line, and this is an unsustainable path. And there are people written and thought about this. Neil Ferguson, one of the voices featured, he literally wrote the book called Civilizations. And, some politicians like Baroness Philippa Stroud, who founded the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, certainly Oz, who has a perspective as emerges in the film, not only theoretically, but also personally. The first 10 years of his life seeing the Cultural Revolution in China.
Yeah, John, I have known Oz for a very, very long time, and I think I first actually met him in 1991. I went out to Washington and spent time with him there and interviewed him and have known him ever since. I did not know all of these details, only generally, that he was born in China and that his parents were missionaries and everything. But the kind of perspective that he lays out there about the first 10 years of his life really puts, I think it lays a perspectival foundation for what he wants to, and you and the rest are trying to accomplish with this piece, is to help kind of stand back. And just like we think of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, well, that was a long time ago. We're in our moment now, and we don't realize that could change very rapidly and very, very powerfully. Somebody, I don't know who he is quoting, but the citation was about bankruptcy. And he said, how does bankruptcy happen? Well, it happens very, very slowly, and then it happens very fast.
And then suddenly, that was Oz in the truck. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
I love also, by the way, the former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, John Anderson. He uses another analogy that I think is really helpful, which is you put the wrong fuel in the tank and it sputters and dies.
Right.
And, when you say earlier that people are feeling it, that's one of the observations that we try to make in the film. All of this stuff is theoretical, but then you look around to, the chaos around the last week, but the political back and forth, the amount of uncertainty, of the dominance of the West. I mean, there's just a lot of examples of this, that this is a very real situation that we're in. Now, I'm not just interested in doing this project, and neither was Oz, for a history project or for something really interesting. The question is the question that Francis Schaeffer asked and that Chuck Colson and Nancy Pearcey asked, which is, how do we live now?
Right.
And George Orwell famously is credited with saying that in an age of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. I think that for Christians, we believe a couple things. Number one, if we're in this crazy civilizational moment that Oz describes, it's because God called us here. This is a film about calling, ultimately. Why are we called to this time and place, and what does it mean for us to be faithful to the moment? And then secondly, I think it means for everyone. It's going to look differently, your job is to be Greg Koukl and to travel and speak and train thousands, or if your job is to be a mechanic or whatever else. But the point is that it's all going to involve, for all of us, truth and courage. Truth and courage. Truth and courage. The church, to be the church right now, has to be a church of truth and a church of courage. And that's not something we would necessarily see if we looked around. I think there's good signs. I think the response, for example, even to the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and we've seen what some people have called, for example, in Europe, a quiet revival, people coming back to truth, great start. But man, what does it mean for us that are in Christ and truth and courage? That's where I'm landing this right now. That's what the film's about.
Well, one of the reflections in the next show, actually, I'll be giving some personal thoughts about the Charlie Kirk situation. And but one of the things that occurred to me very quickly as I'm thinking about this, and I was in a very, I can't go into details, but a very unique set of circumstances where when all of this unfolded. And some of our colleagues as well, as others might know. But so it hits us all very closely, so to speak. But what struck me was, and I'll say more about this in another show, but that it's going to cost every single Christian something, and sometimes something very dear, to be faithful to Christ. It actually doesn't matter when you happen to be living. And it's unusual in this country for a Christian, and I think Charlie Kirk was cut down in virtue of his Christianity, not just his so-called politics, because his politics flowed from a robust Christian worldview, and he was much a Christian apologist as he was a policy wonk, And it's not going to cost everybody that price, and hopefully this is not a trend in this country, but it's happening all over the world now, and it has for 2,000 years. And one thing that we can all take away from this, and this is part of the point you're making here, truth and courage, is that if we are going to stand courageously for the truth, which we must, because we are followers of Christ, it's going to cost us something. All who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. 2 Timothy, Paul's last will and testament, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think what we see instead is a real crisis of confidence often among Christians. If somebody came up and really wants to fight with me about the whether the earth is flat or round, I'm not going to get real worked up about that.
Right.
And I'm certainly not going to be ashamed to say what I think, So what is it when some of these really critical, crucial issues, controversial issues, the ones that cost us, invites back to the party, or it costs us social credit in some way or another, if we go silent or if we just go irate? And that's what I've seen way more Charlie Kirk videos after he died than before, and like millions of others. And what you see is someone who has a real confidence that the truth can stand. And I think he also has a confidence in the Lord, and that's one of the things we also wanted to bring out. So, as I said, the film goes from civilization to calling, and by calling, what we did is told 5 stories of truth tellers right now. And these are 5 stories. And honestly, Greg, one of the things behind this is Francis Schaeffer answered that question, how then shall we live? Chuck Colson answered, how now shall we live? I was going to title it the same thing, but we ran out of adverbs. There was no more way to kind of do it, But they described it, and they described it well. Schaeffer described about, real Christianity. William Wilberforce described in his book Practical Christianity.
Right.
But we wanted to portray it because each of these stories tell something different about why truth is true, why you can stand on it and leave the results to God. So Chloe Cole, Jack Phillips, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Katie Faust, and Seth Dillon. And all of them in very, very different ways.
That's right.
Truth and courage. And you're right. I think you're exactly right. And, we talked about this even this weekend in Atlanta about counting the cost, paying the price.
Right.
And that's the lot that we have in this civilizational moment. And I hope we see it as an opportunity. I mean, no one wants to go through more violence or certainly be the victim of it. But what an incredible, incredible moment to be alive as the body of Christ.
Well, it reminds me of Esther, which is an ancient book. So this line has been around for a long time for such a time as this. And was it her uncle Mordecai, as they're facing very dangerous circumstances for the Jews, maybe God has raised you up for such a time as this. And I think of that phrase a lot, John, involved in terms of the work you're doing and the work I'm doing and work Stand to Reason and all of our players and all of our colleagues are doing, speaking the truth with courage and also in love. And something I've noticed over the last, I'm almost 52 years in the Lord and engaged in defending the faith most of that time. But, when I first started out, it was pretty shrill, and now what I've seen is our voices have calmed down, which communicates a tremendous sense of confidence, I think. In other words, we're not so shrill. It's part of our culture at Stand to Reason, calm, cool, collected, good ambassadors. And by the way, you mentioned Charlie, and I didn't notice this before. I watched some videos just recently since his killing, and Charlie would say something with a hand mic, and then he'd lay the microphone down. In other words, okay, now it's your turn. You go ahead. It's all yours. I'll listen. That communicates a tremendous amount of confidence. Yeah. So the calmness with which we engage, the courage that we engage with, this all has a powerful impact on people. And this is a time that's unlike any other time. I became a Christian during the Jesus movement, John, and that was a great time to become a Christian. Now is a great time to become a Christian in a very different way, because Christianity is not cool. It is not a pop movement like it was then. Now it's getting serious, and I have seen the sides in this recent event with Charlie get polarized. You mentioned a few moments ago just the response. Well, there's been two responses. Some, about 1 million people in Great Britain are rallying on behalf of the memory of Charlie Kirk, and at the same time, you're seeing people that are rallying in favor of the killer.
Yeah.
And others like them. It's bizarre.
It is. And it tells you why when Oz calls it a civilizational moment, he's onto something, because we're untethered. When we say ideas have consequences and bad ideas have victims, we don't just mean for individuals, although that is true, but we mean for civilizations. A civilization cannot unmoor from the truth. Oz uses the analogy of a cut flower, in which a flower, when it's cut off from its roots, will stay shiny and pretty for a while, but it'll wither and die.
It's a great illustration.
And civilizations are rarely just cut off overnight. I mean, I don't know any that are. They fade away, and that's really the state that we're in. Now, they're really susceptible to revolution. We've seen that even in the West, right? That other forces, revolution rarely ends well. I mean, you have a couple good examples and mostly bad examples of revolutions.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I don't know whether, Greg, what the future of the Western world is. Yeah. I want to be, I don't want to be a pessimist. I don't want to be an optimist. I want to be a realist. It may be a Wilberforce moment, where God uses his people to restore and renew, like he did in 19th century Britain. It could be a Wilberforce moment, a Bonhoeffer moment, where no matter what you try, that it's just going to collapse.
Right.
But the thing is the question is, what kind of people are we going to be in this time and place? Yeah. And Bonhoeffer is a model for the generations because of his faithfulness. So is Wilberforce. And so we have to look at that, and that's all we can know.
Well, I remember, reading about Bonhoeffer, for example, in 1933 when Hitler was elected, and they passed the Aryan paragraph, which says, Jews can't take any position of leadership in any organization. Well, that applied to the church too. And Bonhoeffer said, well, wait a minute. You can't tell us how to run the church. Only Jesus can do that. And so he spoke and wrote letters and cajoled and back and forth and did all he could until finally he just drew a line in the sand and said no. And said no. And there's a whole lot of Christians that went along with the Third Reich in everything. Right. A lot of members of the church is what I mean, but not that we're at a Third Reich moment, but this is a perilous moment, and I think the documentary shows that well. And I love the different people that are highlighted there, that are cameoed, their circumstances. You mentioned Chloe Cole. I think that's a transgender girl, right?
That is a wonderful redemptive.
Oh my
so many
goodness.
lessons in this, Greg.
Yeah.
In fact, one that relates to what you were just saying. So Chloe Cole was deceived by one of the great lies of our day, which is that you can be born into the wrong body. It really has targeted young girls. She was an example of this. Double mastectomy at age 16. And, when you think about lost causes, that kind of story, you're like, there's no turning back from that. But there is, because that's what's so good about truth. Truth can renew, it can restore. So first she comes to the truth about her own body. And then she is fully, and by the way, Charlie Kirk had an influence in her life to this. She eventually comes to Christ.
Yeah.
Now, think about that order, because what you and I have been told by those who want to capitulate to the bad ideas of our time is that if you make a big deal about this sexual stuff, then you're going to turn people away from Christ. Chloe came to Christ after coming to the truth about, it was coming to the truth about herself. And God is so gracious, first of all, that truth is true about everything, right? It's not just spiritual truth or religious truth, it's true truth. And that has pointed her, to Christ. And now God is using her mess to turn her into an unbelievable messenger. Chloe is an incredible spokesperson for truth right now.
Yeah, and she's got a platform. This is she's taken the tragedy of her life, her own personal life, and then she's bringing life into the lives of other people as a result of that. I did think, though, obviously, when you said there's no going back, there is going back, but that doesn't mean there aren't going to be consequences.
Long term, yeah, that's right.
And so, she's going to have to live with those, and she even talks about them quite candidly. And then you have, you mentioned the baker.
Jack Phillips. That's a great story.
Masterpiece Cake Shop. And this guy, in your environs there in Colorado, you're in Colorado Springs, and, and he's had to fight this battle a number of times. The piece just talks about his first battle with the courts, but I think he's had to revisit that a number of times. It's a great an account of a person who is willing to just say no, just that line in the sand like Bonhoeffer, and paid quite a price for that. Ended up being justified and making a way for so many others to live according to truth, too, because he was willing to suffer through that whole process with the Supreme Court, et cetera.
No kidding. Listen, people ask what my favorite story is, and those are my two favorites, and then I have three more. So there's five. I just love them all. I mean, but I know Jack, and I was on my front porch, Greg, in Colorado when reading the newspaper. You remember newspapers, those paper things that had actual words on them? Yeah. Real newspaper, and I read that a baker refuses to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding, and two things came to my mind. Number one, we don't have same-sex weddings in Colorado. This was before Obergefell. This was before any state movement. So I thought, how could he be in trouble for something that doesn't exist?
Right.
But then I thought, that guy's in a lot of trouble. And I had no idea even then how much. It seemed like there was an inevitability that he was going to lose this. This started a 13-year battle that had three different battles in it, three different lawsuits, where the state of Colorado went after him twice and then allowed a private citizen to harass him. You know what stands out to me about Jack's story? Two things. Number one, Jack could have just baked the cake and we would have never heard his name. His business would have never been affected. His name would have never made national attention. He made a decision not because he wanted any of that to happen, but because he knew what truth was.
Right.
The second thing that comes to mind is, after 13 years, I do not know a more joyful person than Jack Phillips. And I was talking to, on another podcast earlier, and the host, Sissy Graham, who is Billy Graham's granddaughter, said, she said, whenever I hear Jack Phillips' story, I tear up. And I said, you know what? Whenever Jack Phillips tells his story, he tears up. And you know what he tears up at, Greg? He tears up at the number of people who have come to Christ because of his story. Wow. And I think, he could have sat this one out. And Jack's story is quintessential: trust God, do the right thing, trust God with the results. And God can be trusted with the results.
Yeah,
God can be trusted with our obedience.
I'm glad you kind of closed that point off or that way, because it isn't like do the right thing so that lots of people can get saved, because sometimes it works out that way and sometimes it doesn't.
You don't know.
You don't know, but it is do the right thing for the sake of honoring God, and then God will figure out what He's going to do with your obedience. It might be very modest, it might be massive. What the important thing is the audience of one. Now, I don't want to miss Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and I hope I pronounced her name right, because I never could get it right usually, but she's got a very different kind of story, because she goes from this impoverished Muslim family in Africa to living in Holland, and then I think in Netherlands, and then coming to the U.S. and then becoming totally hostile to any religion. She's an atheist, and now she's a follower of Jesus. It was that, for me, was one of the most riveting of the 5 stories, although all of them had their unique aspects to them.
So Ayaan's story emerges as we're making this documentary, Greg. It's crazy. And that's why it's so stunning to us. We just kept going, this is what it's all about. Like, her story is so quintessential. First of all, that what's true about someone individually, they need God, is true about the whole civilization. Mm-hmm. Second, we invited her to be a spokesperson in the first half in other words, when people were talking about civilizations and talking about how civilizations rise and fall, and her experience having gone from a Muslim civilization to the West, and how a secular West isn't enough in and of itself, stuff that she had written and talked about just in the last two years. And as we're going through this process, her personal faith journey becomes more and more obvious. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a miraculous side to her story, and I don't want to give it away. It's in the film. But it tells you how kind God is to not only be the truth about the world, but can transform an individual life. Yeah. But listen, she was a new atheist, along with Peter Hitchens, Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and so on. I mean, this is a group that obviously told us that God's a delusion and religion poisons everything. Some of them now are pointing us back to cultural Christianity. Mm-hmm. That's what we thought her story was at the time. Mm-hmm. And then it just became clear, no, something else happened. And I'm not going to give away the details because it's too good.
Sure, that's right.
But let me say one thing.
Okay.
This is the point. Because she talks about her journey from radical Islam into the secular West to truth, to God. And she says, my whole life I've been looking for freedom. And I'm finally free. And isn't that what Jesus said himself about truth, right?
That's right.
You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free.
Yeah.
Her story is amazing, an example of that.
You mentioned cultural Christianity, and it's such an odd thing that's happening. Justin Brierley, you probably know Justin.
I just talked to him about it on my podcast. Absolutely. Okay. Fascinating conversation.
Well, he'd had the podcast Unbelievable in the UK there, and he's written this book that, let me see if I get it, The Remarkable Surprising Rebirth of the belief in God. And he talks about some of these individuals, and Ayaan is one of the examples there. But this cultural Christianity, it's so unusual that even Richard Dawkins, as hard-boiled of an atheist as he is, he says, I am a cultural Christian. And what he means, he said, I don't believe a word of that stuff, but I want to live in a culture where the people do believe it and act consistently with it. And another one that made the same kind of comments, Douglas Murray, who is also raising the issues that you raise in Truth Rising, the danger to Western civilization. It's collapsing right before our eyes. And he makes the same comment. I think he calls himself a Christian atheist or an atheist Christian or something, because his convictions are atheistic, I think, or used to be, but all of his values are Christian. And he realizes, I value those things that fit in a different worldview than my own. And both of these are acknowledgments that the details, including the values of the Christian view of reality, resonate with the deepest intuitions that we have in our heart as to what reality is actually like. And of course, this is why we have the reality
Right.
conferences and Story of Reality this season, which you were a prominent part in. And did you do breakouts also in addition to the evening?
I did, yeah. I
Yeah.
talked about the image of God and then did a session for the leaders really on some of the aspects of Truth Rising because of this. Because, we have two of those individuals, by the way, in the film who are advocating for cultural Christianity. Maybe not as blatantly as some of them, but David Berlinski, not a believer.
Oh, yeah, right.
Brilliant mathematician, quirky guy, has some some of the best lines in the film.
That's right.
And Konstantin Kisin, a young guy, immigrant from Russia, really, really funny guy who, as he says in the film, he's a Russian who loves Britain. That's how you know he's not a Brit.
Yeah.
Is that he likes. But one of the things that they're pointing out is not just that or recognizing the good of Christianity, but there is a real sense in which there is a recognition of the bankruptcy of secularism. And it's just not going to deliver. You can't build on this stuff. And Greg, I was thinking about this. Since you threw in how old we are, and by the way, you're way older than I am. I just want everyone to know that. But 25 years ago, and look, I learned all this stuff from Chuck Colson and Bill Brown and Norm Geisler. That's when I first learned it. So we were talking about postmodernism and this idea that there's no truth and everyone's the definer of their own truth. And we would use these hypotheticals, Greg. We would say, well, if everyone can define reality for themselves, doesn't that mean that stop could mean go and up could mean down and boy could mean girl? And those were all hypotheticals.
Yeah.
And Greg, here we are. At least one of those things is now debated in Congress.
Yeah, you can't parody this kind of stuff because the minute you try to parody it, it becomes reality. And it reminds me of Francis Schaeffer's famous line: "What was unthinkable yesterday is thinkable today and ordinary and commonplace tomorrow."
Yeah.
And this is why so many of our young people, even in the church, it's hard for them to even make sense of the idea that same-sex marriage is somehow morally suspect because it just seems so ordinary to them now.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And I think that we have been told, Christians, and this is really one of the main points, is that we have been told we have to go along. You have to be relevant. And you don't want to say things that are going to push people away from the gospel. And somehow that always ends up being truth. Don't speak the truth out loud.
Right. Yeah.
And I just think these stories are an example. I think, you think about, just what we've seen in the last 10 years, from the rise of the nuns, many of whom who had spiritual baggage from churches, to the rise of the spiritual who have baggage with secularism. Trust the truth. Because ultimately the truth is the person of Jesus Christ. Chloe Cole says this really well in the film. There's not your truth or my truth. Jesus Christ is the truth. Yeah. And that is solid ground, to the point of the title of your newsletter. That is solid ground. And it's reliable. And I think we are seeing an emergence of people willing to tell the truth. We need to see more. Our vision for the film, Greg, is simply this. Could you imagine the difference it would make in America, just America, if there were 1,000 more truth tellers than there were yesterday?
Yeah.
If there were 1,000 people who had their own Jack Phillips moment and decided, you know what, I'm not going to go along with the lies. I'm going to just stand. I'm going to do it right. I'm not going to be a jerk. I'm going to do it right. And I think all that's possible. And that's the vision of the film.
Well, John, just to repeat, this wonderful thinker that we have on board, my friend and my guest on the show, is also one of our keynote speakers for reality this season. We still got Seattle coming up in October. We have Minneapolis coming up in November, and then we have February is Dallas. March is where? Philadelphia, right, and then we'll be in Southern California in April. John will be at all of them, and we really are here, though, today to do two things, to say, watch this documentary, Truth Rising, and you can find that, tell me if I'm wrong here, John, truthrising.com, is that right?
Truthrising.com, and it's absolutely free. We, Focus on the Family has been a wonderful partner on this, as is Oz, and we just decided right up front we're going to remove all the barriers.
Yeah.
We want this to, basically, here's the journey. This is civilization. This is the state of the West. You've been called to this incredible moment.
Right.
Here's how you can be a voice of courage. Here's what it means to be a voice of truth and courage. And then that hopefully will lead people into a 4-part study that's available on truthrising.com, absolutely free, on 4 aspects of what I think will make us voices of courage: hope, truth, identity, calling. And that's all available there, truthrising.com.
Yeah, so the history stuff is really important. It sets a foundation, but this documentary is a call to our calling in the broadest sense of the word, that who we are to be in the body of Christ in the world to make a difference, putting our hand to the plow and not looking back. John,
Amen.
You've been great. I've sure enjoyed our friendship over the many years, and thrilled that you found time to spend reality with us for all 6 sessions. So thank you for that.
Hey, listen, Greg, I'm so grateful for you. You've been so good and kind. Thanks for spreading the word about Truth Rising, and looking forward to more of these reality events too.
Yeah, we'll do that. Truthrising.com is where you can find it, and my guest, of course, John Stonestreet.